So welcome everyone to Chevalier's Books Online. We are LA's oldest independent bookstore, established in 1940. Tonight we are celebrating J. Michael Straczynski's first literary novel, Together We Will Go, which was just published this past Tuesday. Together We Will Go is a heartfelt novel about 12 strangers who come together to make the most of their final days. Here to interview the author, we have Alex Dueben. Alex has written for the LA Times, the LA Review of Books, the Comics Journal, The Believer, and many, many more publications. We also have with us, of course, tonight's star, J. Michael Straczynski, who has written hundreds of hours of television, films, and graphic novels. He is the acclaimed creator of Babylon 5 and co-creator of Sense8. His extensive list of awards include the Hugo, the Eisner, and the GLAAD Media Award. Without further ado, please give a warm welcome to our two speakers tonight, J. Michael Straczynski and Alex Dueben. If you two would please take it away.
Thanks, glad to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Alex, great to see you as well, and let's cause some trouble.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess just to start, I'll start with a very obvious question, which is, where did this book begin for you?
I wanted to write this story for a long time because I have had a number of people in my life who have checked out early. It's actually close to a dozen, which is a really unusually high number. So as I mentioned before, I think I'm a carrier at this point. And there's always the question of why and wherefore and what did it mean and was there something someone could have done, something someone could have said. And I wanted to explore the dynamic of that, particularly because I've had other friends or people that I've known who attempted suicide but did not follow through or stopped halfway through. And in almost every case, the impulse to do that happened very suddenly. They weren't expecting it. These are people who never thought that they would be susceptible to that thought. And because they figure, oh, it'll never happen to me, they got blindsided by it. So I thought, part of the reason to write the book is to create all these different scenarios where all these different characters, for different reasons, from physical illness to mental disorders to nihilism to a wide range of things, decide to walk off the earth ahead of time, so that we put the reader through all those different thought processes, so that by the end of the book, you're kind of inoculated a little bit. You know what that feeling sounds like and feels like. So part of my hope is to create that inoculation, that vaccination, if you will. But more than anything else, I wanted to do a story about a very controversial subject that had joy and beauty and friendship, and was not designed to be a heartbreaking one-person story about that decision-making process. By the time they're on the bus, they've all gotten there. They all come to that decision, and just to explore that dynamic. Writers like to go places where it's kind of dangerous. So figure, okay, let's do a story on a controversial subject matter, written in epistolary format, which doesn't happen a whole lot anymore. Let's take like every chance that there is all at once, because you're not taking chances, you're not daring great things, nothing will ever happen. So that was the thought process behind it.
And it is, I mean, it's very easy to say it's about suicide, therefore it's controversial. But part of the reason I think it might be controversial is because you do take the idea very seriously. And you treat these characters that, for whatever we might think of them, they have thought this out very deeply to come to this point.
Yes, it's not patronizing, it's not simplistic. You can tell their stories and respect their stories while agreeing with their stories. Some of them, like one character, has a Isomer syndrome, which causes a hole in his heart, and he has at this point maybe a year to live at best anyway, and would rather spend that time on this trip with these people than sitting in a hospice wired up to tubes and chemicals and suffering all the time. So that we can more or less understand, because okay, I can kind of see where that comes from. Another character whose position is more intellectual, where his it's an almost a nihilistic point of view. Like, why should I even bother? And that one you can look at it and go, I'm not sure I buy into that one. But the characters take it seriously, and we take it seriously. It's not poo-pooed. It's not derided, or you shouldn't be feeling that way. No one gets a vote on how you feel about things. And these characters had to be treated respectfully and appropriately.
Well, and I think someone once said that the novelist has to love their characters the way God does.
God hates me, though. That's a terrible thing to say. So by the time I deserve all the crap that happens to me.
You like your characters more than God likes them? Okay, that.
I
But the
love
point
my
being-
characters. God hates me. That's the
Okay.
God loves my characters. My characters like me. I like my characters. God, not so much. He and I don't get along.
But the point being, and I think this becomes one of those topics that some readers have to take issue with, but part of the goal, the job of the writer is to present the characters as they are and as they understand themselves. Not
Exactly. My role isn't to judge them. They have to speak for themselves. And in doing so, it becomes honest storytelling. The moment you start putting your own perceptions or beliefs onto it, then it becomes propaganda.
Well, and was that part of the reason, as you said, this is an epistolary novel, was that one reason you decided to go that route, that it allowed you to sort of let the characters just speak for themselves?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to have a lot of characters in the story, and telling it from one person's point of view wouldn't really let us get into the different kinds of truth that come out when you're writing only for yourself or talking only for yourself. And there's, how does it work? There's, I think, like 4 or 5 kinds of truth. The truth you tell to strangers you meet, the truth you tell to your friends and your family, the truth you tell to only very few people in your entire life, the truth you tell yourself, and the truth you don't even admit to yourself. And by virtue of letting them speak in their own voices and confront their own feelings directly rather than having it reported by somebody else externally, lets you address all 5 of those at the same time.
I also kept thinking that, I mean, you're mostly known, I think it's fair, as a screenwriter, as a comics writer. Being an epistolary novel lets you lean into the form a little more to do something that could only be a novel.
To a degree, but the difference between scripts and prose is that television film, it's all external. You really rarely get into the person's brain. You're hearing what they're saying, but what they're saying may not reflect who they actually are. Versus novels that are primarily interior, where you kind of get that point of view. So on the one hand, it lets me cut back and forth in different perspectives, so that is the filmic side of it. But the structural imperative was to dig deep into the emotions in ways you can't do in a script.
Well, and in here and in other recent novels, people might have read Jennifer Egan's book, or Herman Wouk's The Lawgiver.
Yeah.
It's about using text messages and transcripts of conversations and using various ways to sort of present this.
Exactly. Yeah, it's almost like looking over their shoulders as they're writing these things, and that somehow makes it feel a little bit more intimate, I think, in many respects.
No, I think so. And also it presents the world as, it shows the world being much more textual than I think sometimes we think.
Oh, definitely.
For all the death of the written word, we do write a great deal and encounter a lot of text.
Absolutely. Could not agree more.
But also it's as you say, it's a story about suicide, and it's a story about community, which sort of feels contradictory in a sense. But you really wanted to explore this group of people and to find a way to bring them all together.
Yeah, and oddly enough, it's, as much as it's a novel about suicide, it's also a larger metaphor as well, because they all have a shelf life attached to them right now. But so do we all. No, we're not immortal. We're not going to live forever. And the question becomes, how do we want to spend that time? Whether it's, 20 years or 3 days. And I wanted to sort of examine that question and show that even these characters who have made this decision can develop friendships, and can develop love, and can discover beauty and community. One of the things that you find with people who are suffering from various psychological, emotional issues, that they feel completely isolated. But you put a bunch of them in a room having similar issues, they bond over what makes them different. That break, they recognize in each other, and that forms community. And everything I've ever written, really, at the end of the day, it's about hope, it's about love, and it's about community. The idea that we are better together than we are apart, that the common coin of our shared humanity is more important than whatever they would throw against us. There are those who profit from separating us and keeping us at each other's throats. And I think there's a better way of going about things.
Well, and that idea of they all come together, and it's, as you said, they find beauty, they find friendship, they each find something, but what that means and how it affects their decision it's not universal.
Yeah, it can't be. We're not, we don't work in rows, we're not machines, we react differently to each other. And for me, it was just overall a chance to really explore beauty in storytelling. That's kind of where I landed as a writer. I started off early on, like most writers, all about plot. What's the story? What's the MacGuffin? What's the thing? The artificiality, the construct. And then I kind of went, well, that's all interesting, but it doesn't matter if you haven't got good characters. I became all about characters and the relationships and that sort of thing. And then, well, that's just history. That's emotional. So that's the real thing to aspire toward, is truth in storytelling. That's an even greater issue. And then within truth, you then bundle in the story and the characterization. And I thought that was kind of, I got there. I know what I'm doing now finally. And recently, last few years, it's been, no, it's not about those. The third thing is still a subset. That what I'm aspiring toward is beauty in storytelling. That's the hardest one to quantify or explain to anybody without sounding cliche or stupid or corny. But within beauty, you get truth, you get character, you get the story, you get everything else. And so in the course of the book, there are all these little moments of perfect beauty that we discover. And that is what appeals to me these days as a storyteller, is to find those moments of beauty in the story.
Well, and also those are the moments that often for characters are very defining. What do they find beautiful? How does it affect them? Those are such key moments.
Oh, absolutely. I agree.
But talk a little about, if you would, about structure, because as a writer, you're known for structure, I think. It's always been very important. How does one structure a novel like this?
When I write, I always write linearly. I start at the beginning and I work my way toward the end. I am not capable of jumping ahead. Some writers that I've known can write chapter 14 while they're writing chapter 3. I get the screaming willies. I cannot do that. And what I try and do is, I finish something, I sort of say, okay, what is the next true response? If something terrible has happened, well, then they're going to be upset or in shock or somehow reacting to that. So you just go from one truth to the next. And as long as you do that, the structure lays out just fine. The moment you start to bend that structure away from how they would naturally react, the story becomes artificial. On a much larger macro level, I look at it as structuring a screenplay or a novel or whatever it happens to be, like driving from LA to San Diego. You know where you're starting, you know where you're going to finish, you know some places in between you want to stop off to do some shopping or get a cup of coffee, but you leave yourself open to discovery, to surprise. Because I think as a writer, if you are not capable of surprising yourself, you could never surprise an audience. So it's crucial to have that safety line. That's great, but beyond that, be open to let the story reveal itself. I think that for years I tried to like make art happen. And I realized after a while, you let art happen and you get out of the way of it. So in recent years, I've gotten more and more like just a piece of glass at the keyboard. So I get out of my own way, and whatever the story is, it's taking care of itself. My job is to transcribe it all.
So for the book, you pretty much had this concept, which people can read at the back of the book: a group of strangers coming together. We're going to drive in a bus to San Francisco and then commit suicide together. And for you, it was about figuring out the characters and just going step by step along the way and letting them surprise you.
Yeah, I knew that there's a secret that Mark had about why he was doing what he was doing. I knew where I wanted to start. And I knew like one or two characters, like Karen who has a neurological pain disorder that she's always constantly in pain. I knew about her and like one or two others, but beyond that, again, I left myself open to surprise. So for instance, there is one sequence early on where they stop off at a stadium to pick up a couple of new writers. And one of them named Lisa comes on first, and you kind of, she was going to be bipolar and lots of energy, but I really hadn't had a lock on who was going to come next. And so I'm writing the thing, and she goes and moves down the bus aisle. And then I turn back with the character, and the guy at the top of the stairs is blue. I had not anticipated that. I had not thought about that. I'm like, okay, why is he blue? I need to do some research here. And does this actually happen? Because if it doesn't happen, then I have to take it out. And sure enough, there is a thing called Isomer Syndrome where there's a hole in the heart that makes the blood go the wrong way, and cyanosis sets in, and the skin doesn't get the oxygen that it requires and begins to turn a bluish tint. And I was able to then take that realization and that diagnosis and structure his entire arc based on that. So I had the structure of the larger story, but over that, I was able to say, okay, how does a person who is constantly out of breath, who is constantly fighting to move and to walk and to do anything, factor into our dynamic? So I let the story kind of reveal itself, and the characters reveal themselves as I went. And it never ceases to amaze me that where this comes from, I have no idea. There's a story of a poet who was saying that, you know, she's often sometimes in the garden working, and she'll feel a poem coming toward her. And she has to run to the house to write it down, because if she's just too late, the poem will go past her and find somebody else. And the process often feels a lot like that.
So you had to write it one chapter at a time, sequentially, because if you wrote further on, a new character, a new idea in chapter 6 meant you would have to throw out everything later.
Exactly. I would have to kind of, if I'm writing chapter 13, I'm in the middle of chapter 4, I'll have to guess at what happens in chapters 5 through 12. And I'm almost always going to be wrong if I do that. But I let each chapter unfold, and each chapter is its own story. Each chapter is its own chronology. There's always a matter of intent when you write, and as a novel or a script has a beginning, the middle, and end, every scene has a beginning, middle, and end. It's not just there to get the reader from here to there. You're telling a story within that scene. And until you resolve what that story is and you have an ending point to it, you really can't jump off to what follows next.
I mean, I feel very uncomfortable because I don't want to spoil anything for people, but I'll say simply, not everyone is dead at the end of the book. How about that? That's
fair. The question is, who will stay, who will not stay, what's going to happen to them? Yeah, correct.
And I get, well, and as part of that, I mean, how did you figure out? I mean, was it just a question of every now and again you hit a chapter and you suddenly knew the character was going to get off the bus, or?
Yeah, for instance, there's a situation, there was one character named Zeke who I knew for sure was going to pass away at some point early on. Another character later on who also passes away. That one came out of the circumstances, in the sense that our characters are in a really bad situation. We need someone to step up and get them out of that. And this one character was the logical choice and the logical way to go. And it's like he stood up and said, look, it's me. Let's just do this. It's letting the characters make their own way. It's the goddamnedest thing. There was a writer once who was doing a story, and there's a older woman going downstairs, and he needed to have her die on the stairs, and so he had a little like bump in the rug that goes on the steps. She catches her heel and falls down and dies. And he's writing this down, and she gets to the bottom, and she gets up, dusts herself off, looks to the writer, and says, "That's completely wrong. You've written me this entire book like a control freak, always very neat. There would not be a bump in the rug on the stairs. I wouldn't allow that. So instead, how about you have me, as I take the first step down, look back to see if I turned off the light. And because I'm looking back while I'm stepping down, then I can fall and die." They're like, well, that kind of makes sense. So let's go for that. But she goes back upstairs. She rolls back in the Word file. She takes the step. She looks back. She trips. She falls. She stays dead this time. And that's the negotiation process with every act, character, and every scene. It's letting it find its own way. It sounds mystical or metaphysical, but it's not. It's just listening to the truth of the characters.
It's simple, but it's also very not simple.
Yeah, you have to get there over time, and you have to get out of your own way and allow the art to happen. I've given this metaphor many times, but it's still appropriate. It's like an old-fashioned dance hall, and you've got one guy over here who is just got out of the Arthur Murray dance school, and he's doing fine. You're gonna hear him in his head going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and over there is Fred Astaire, and he's just dancing. There's trying to dance, and there's dancing. There's trying to write, and there's writing. And when it becomes effortless and transparent and luminous and fun, where they're doing all the work and you're just writing it down, that's the best part of it. When you're just in that zone with them, and they're doing all the work. But it takes a while to get there. Unlearn a lot of bad habits.
But I wonder if you could talk a little about Vaughn, because he is sort of he is one of the central characters in the book, for a number of reasons.
Yeah, everyone in the book except for one character, they're all in their 20s, because suicide right now is the #2 cause of death among millennials and Generation Z. It is as much a part of that culture and that world as anything else. And I wanted to explore why characters and people who are in that age range would consider walking off the earth. But I also wanted to sort of be able to jump out of that point of view to explore an older character in a way that reflects on both sides, where the younger characters, look, I have infinite regard for millennials and Generation Z, because I think they're the ones who are going to save the world and change the world, if only because they have less to lose than the generations that just came right before them, who have all been busy, destroying the climate, sucking up all the money. Most millennials and Gen Zs that I know come out of college saddled with massive amounts of debt. They put experience ahead of owning things so they can't afford to freaking buy anything. They are fine with success if it's done ethically and appropriately. They are looking at the cinder of a world down 30 years from now. Che Guevara once said that every country is 3 meals short of revolution. And meaning if you have 3 meals, you're less apt to do anything about it. But if you don't have those 3 meals, you're more apt to change things. And the fact that this generation does not have the same choices, doesn't have the same opportunities. They're in the gig economy. Steady jobs are hard to find. Always we move back and forth among schedules and for crap money. They don't have the same number of choices as those who preceded them. Vaughn had all the choices in the world. He could have been and done anything he wanted to. He had the talent, he had the drive, and he settled for maybe I should be safe instead, so that his life is a catalog of missed opportunities. So you have someone who had all the choices, ends up with nothing. Those who have very few choices, and in that weird sort of dynamic, they find each other, and are bookends in that respect. And Vaughn, some people say the hardest part of the book to read is him talking about those choices that he had and that he just let pass by. And I really wanted to explore that dynamic because it happens a lot in my demographic. A lot of folks look back at their lives as catalogs of missed opportunities because of fear. And I wanted to address that as well.
Well, and Vaughn also, and I think this is something that probably people of many ages can relate to. There is a way in which he reaches this point in his life where he could do anything. He is no longer beholden or has anyone depending on him, and he could literally do anything, and he has no idea what to do.
Yeah, he finds himself alone, single, widowed.
Yeah.
And he has money, and he realizes he has nothing to do with it. He doesn't know what to do with his life. He could go to, he's in his late 60s. He'd go to school, but he'd get a degree, but by the time he got out, he'd be 70. His family doesn't live very long to begin with. He could travel, but what's the point of traveling by yourself? He can't put himself in a box again. And the story that he tells in the book was actually a true story. That while I was living in New Jersey, there was, as a kid, on the way back from school, there was this open lot where there was a guy with a pony ride. And there was like a wooden railing like this, and the pony would be inside the wooden railing, and it would go around in circles. You could ride it for like a dime, go around 4 times. And I felt bad for the pony because all it did every day was just go in a circle, go in a circle, go in a circle. And one day I was coming home from school late, and the guy was putting the pony into a lot behind the circular area. And I was really excited, thinking, oh, great, I get to see the pony being free and doing what it wants to do. And it just went in circles. That's all it knew. And how many of us are that pony? And Vaughn discovers that he is that pony. And part of why he's here is to change that and to do something that he wants to do, whatever that happens to be, or wherever it goes.
Now, I was wondering, did you ever read the book, Jennifer Michael Hecht's book, Stay?
No.
It's, well, the subtitle is A History of Suicide and the Arguments Against It.
Oh.
And it is, well, the subtitle is self-explanatory, but she kind of goes through multiple cultures and religions. And she's an atheist, which she makes clear. And sort of the 2 arguments that essentially everyone, almost throughout human history, have of why we should not commit suicide, even in cultures that kind of glamorize it, are that we owe it to society and to our communities to stay alive, and we owe it to our future selves. And I was struck, especially reaching the end of Together We Will Go, that I think whatever we might think of the individual choices of the characters, all of those characters believed that also, in a sense.
Did they agree with that assessment?
I think most of them would agree with that.
I think to a degree. A parenthetical, it should be said that the book neither condemns nor condones. It simply as their personal realities. Yeah, it's there's a couple of things in the book that are referenced historically that really kind of inform that point of view. For most of human history, suicide was not illegal. There wasn't any laws against it. It was treated like an everyday facet of life. And in ancient Rome, you would go before the Senate, tell them why you wanted to why you kill yourself. They called it a virtuous death back then. And you pay off whatever debts you had to the state, make sure that you didn't owe anybody else. They'll give you some hemlock and send you merrily on your way. It was only toward the 17th, 18th century that it became something that was frowned upon by the law as a way of taking your property. So if you killed yourself, they assumed you were insane or in some way breaking the law, and they were able to then confiscate your belongings. The first example of this was in England, where they defined the crime of suicide. This is literally the textbook civil code definition of depriving the crown of a subject. So you didn't belong to yourself, you belong to the crown, you belong to the state. And the later version of this, when that fell out of favor, they needed to make it a felony somehow. And that's usually breaking into someone's house or killing someone. So they made it a felony against oneself in order to, again, arrest you or seize your assets. It all became about, as you were saying before, the community and the state owning you. And one of the characters makes the point, look, nobody owns me. I didn't sign a contract having anybody control over me. Again, I'm not condoning or condemning. I'm just saying that it only in relatively recent history has become a crime, and where they say either you are sane and you owe us money, or you're insane and you go in an asylum and you still owe us money.
There is almost that catch-22. If you to commit suicide, you must be insane. But
well, that's the question that Peter raises. Is it, can suicide be a logical, non-emotional response? To some people, it can be. To you and I may not understand that. But that goes down to the question of how it happens. There's those where the suicidal impulse hits you suddenly out of nowhere, and before you know it, bam, you're gone. And there are those who spend a lot of time thinking about it. There's a thing referred to in the book that, again, a friend of mine, she suffered from constant depression, but more than that, she had bottomed out in her career and things weren't working out. She had no one to fall back on. And there were a lot of other factors, but essentially she decided, you know what, I'm just done. Here are all the reasons for sticking around. Here are all the reasons for not sticking around. I'm going to go this way. And over the period of a couple of months, she was very systematic and very logical in how she did things. She tagged everything in her house, who should get what. Things that were too small, she put into little containers so that they would be grouped together for certain people. She was, during that period of time, and we all kind of noticed it, almost kind of relieved, as if a weight had come off of her, having made that decision. And on the day, she packed a picnic lunch, went to her favorite park, spent the day having a little bit of wine or lunch. She wasn't emotionally upset. She was very calm. And as the sun went down over the water, pulled out a gun and blew her brains out. Is that a logical decision, or is that an emotional decision? I can't really say. I'm not sure I'm qualified to have a point of view on that. But only to say that there's different textures involved in the process that I want to explore with this book.
Have you ever dealt with suicidal ideation?
There was a period back many, many years ago when I was bottoming out. There were a lot of issues that I was having personally, professionally, as I think almost anyone does at some point, think, you know what, it'd be easier for everyone if I just wasn't here. I think we all have that thought. There's a difference between ideation and actual suicide attempts. And I think probably most people at some point or other have that thought. Whether you're just fed up with the world, you're angry, you're upset, whatever it is, you're not in a good relationship, and you just want to, you feel like it'd be easier. But then, the common sense asserts itself, and no. I was talking to one friend who had reached a point where he'd been dealing with a lot of issues, had been stalked, had been harassed, had been just, his life was a living hell. And he said, you know what, screw it, I'm out of here. and he had the gun in his hand. And the phone rang, and he answered the phone, and it was a friend inviting him to a baseball game the next day. And it's like, which way do I go with this? And he said, okay, sure, I'll go to the game, figuring that he always do it the day after. But by the time the day after arrived, the huge emotional burden that he was carrying had lifted a bit. And he was able to say, I'll stick around for a bit, and did. So I think that we all come somewhat close to the line from time to time. There's the thing in the book where one character is saying that the suicidal impulse is always there. It's like when your car pulls to the left and you have to keep kind of pulling it to the right so it stays in a straight line. And we all kind of pull to the right in dealing with this impulse because we have things to do and we have promises to keep and a life ahead of us. It's not that one day we decide to kill ourselves as much as we run out of reasons not to kill ourselves. We take our hands off the wheel and it just goes to the left automatically, and next thing you know, you're in the opposing traffic. But to the degree that exploring these issues in the book can start the conversation about why this happens and how it happens and what does it mean, and help people to understand how they can be vulnerable to this, and help them to anticipate and even perhaps avoid having to take that step by virtue of the fact that they have now been exposed to a lot of different ways that people come to that decision, then I think the book will have done some good.
And it is something, I mean, as you were saying, I've dealt with suicidal ideation for most of my life. And that idea that if there was a simple way to end things, if there was a button next to the thermostat, I would have hit it. But having to go through a process requires a lot more than a lot of us are capable of in that state.
But that raises the question for you. You talked about the process. I mean, the process can be as easy as jumping off of a building.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the process, what process was that?
There's always something. Well, there's always something. Something comes up, a call from this, or you have to deal with this the next. There's always something that ties. It's those binds that tie you.
So you were distracted into living?
I was distracted until there was a reason. How about that?
I accept that.
And I think, well, and I think one of the things the book does well is some of the characters don't. And you kind of show that thinking process of coming to this moment of realizing that, yes, things are bad. And in a lot of ways, things haven't gotten better, but this isn't the answer, they know.
Yeah, and you have to decide, is life worth the pain of staying in it? Yeah. There's a joke about a guy who goes to see a psychic, and she says, okay, for the next 5 years, your life is going to be a living hell. You're going to lose money. You're going to lose your job. You're going to lose love. People will despise you. And everything it can possibly go wrong will go wrong. And you will be constantly upset about it. And so what happens after 5 years? You get used to it. That's kind of the deal of life. It's like crap will happen all the course of your life, but eventually you'll get used to it and stick around. And I guess it's just, at what point is the threshold for screw it, And I think for most people it's relatively high. For some people the threshold is a bit lower.
But I know, you're always a very busy guy. And at the risk of taking a very hard right turn, I know this is a year of many other things coming out. For example, I believe you have a comic book about young people in a post-pandemic era rising up against fascism, which is not a realistic story, funny enough, but feels like it. And a nonfiction book as well. Did you want to mention either of those?
Yeah, in the comics world, I'm doing a book for artists, writers, and artisans. A couple of them, several actually. One is The Resistance, which was written about a year before the pandemic hit, and then the pandemic hit. And it was about a pandemic, and so much of what was in the book was exactly what happened in real life. That people were saying, "Oh, it's Nostradamus, Straczynski Damus," and posing the question of if a pandemic hits and all those survivors, some of them get powers, how would the world react to that? And that is done very, very well for AWA. It's created its own universe. There's also a book that's a subset of that called Moths, the first issue, which came out last month, which explores those with latent powers that can activate them, but if they do, there's a price to be paid. And Telepaths, a new book also for AWA about what happens when 10% of the world becomes telepathic. And finally, Becoming a Writer, Staying a Writer, which came out on June 1st, which for me is a great opportunity to pass on what I know, what I figured out. It's been 40 years between writing books, so I needed to sort of learn more stuff along the way. And I figured, now was the best time to write that book because, if I wait another 5 or 10 years, my main concern will not be passing along the techniques and tips that I've learned. It's going to be trying to figure out who stole my pudding. So I figured I need to write that book now while I still can. And it's been doing really well. And it's a very frank and no holds barred discussion of how to make it and stay it as a writer.
I think we would have guessed it. It would be frank and no holds barred.
I can't be otherwise. I'm a pain in the ass.
But I mean, together we will go. I've been telling everyone, and I always feel like a bad marketing person as I say this, that this is nothing like anything you've ever written before, which I know is the marketing copy for everything, ever. But in this case, it is very true. And part of, I guess, staying a writer is, well, for a lot of writers, is always trying to do something new.
Yeah, I think it's important to decide between whether you want to have 10 years of experience or 1 year of experience 10 times. I think it's important to keep pushing yourself to do something new and take chances, and to go outside your comfort zone. Because if you stay inside that little box, what's the point? So when I wrote this novel, I knew I was taking a whole lot of risks, a lot of different directions all at the same time. But that's the point. That's what an artist has to do. It's all about being on the high wire. I think we have some questions now coming in.
Yep, I think it's just about time to get into our audience Q&A, everyone. So if you haven't yet and you have a question, make sure to type that into the chat box and we'll make sure to get to them. I'm actually going to start off with a question that was emailed to us before the event started from a Nicholas Turbin, who asks, Joe, the premise of the book sounds cinematic, but what was the reason why you chose to approach it as a novel and not another type of product or project?
To a certain degree, it's cinematic in terms of the visuals, but no movie could get into the specifics of each character's point of view unless you had just constant narration going on, and then it's not a movie, it's a radio drama. So I just felt that it was much too intimate and small and personal to be made into a movie.
I'm sorry, go on.
Oh, the stories tend to decide for themselves what they want to be. And this one showed up and said, I'm a novel, deal with it.
I love that. That actually ties into a question that someone else is asking, which is that you obviously write in several different mediums. And does writing in one medium versus another require using a different set of writing muscles? And what do you find satisfying or frustrating about each type of writing?
I've never really found the distinction between different forms of writing in terms of how I structure them. They're all about character for me. When I took over Amazing Spider-Man from Marvel Comics, that was a matter of saying, okay, who is this guy? What does he care about? How did these powers come about? Who does he care about? What's our relationship with MJ all about? And those are the same questions I would ask when we're doing a TV series. How do you service the main character? How do you delve into their personality and their relationships? I think that may be one of the reasons why I've kept going as a writer. Most of the writers who I knew when I came to LA in the early Cretaceous period have most of them fallen by the wayside. Their careers kind of bottomed out because they only knew how to do one thing. And when I tried to do something else, they couldn't pull it off. But I've applied the notion of it's not about the kind of stories that I want to write. It's not about what I do. It's about the characters. And just stay with who they are, and you can write anything you want. The thing I can't write is poems, because there's no characters in the poems. It's all about oneself, and I can't write about myself without embarrassing myself. So I run and hide. I'm terrible. It's doggerel. It's just awful. My poetry is just awful.
We've got a question from a P. Koltko who's saying it's been decades, Joe, since your last novel. Obviously, experiences in your personal life have affected how you wrote this book, but how did your experience with writing those scripts and comic books influence how you wrote this one?
I think the journey of the writer, the experience level, is really just about getting out of your own way. We mentioned that earlier, I know, but writing a book about Green Lantern will not inform a book about suicide, but the process in general of stripping away artifice as you go and becoming more naturalistic as a writer is the most important thing. By just the sheer volume of the work, you cannot write X number of projects and not get better along the way, mainly by shedding bad habits and unlearning bad habits. I dare anyone watching this right now to write 10 stories and not have story number 10 be at least incrementally better than story number 1. So everything that I've written over the years has given me more tools, a bigger toolbox, more experience, and learned techniques to explore characterizations that I couldn't have done before. So in general, I could not have written this novel 5 years ago. I didn't have the skill set required. I can now because I've acquired more tools. So it isn't any particular experience that leads to it. It is just the accumulation of silt in my brain that lets me know what to write.
Amazing. Here's a question from Jasmine R that was emailed to us earlier, who's asking about the characters in Together We Will Go. Did you have any particular characters that were easier or more difficult to write? And she also wants to add that her favorite was Zeke's story.
Zeke was a hoot and a half to write. Tyler was relatively easy to write because I could relate to him. He's a nerd. I'm a nerd. He is just a very gentle guy, a nice guy to write about. The hardest, oddly enough, one of the hardest things about writing the book in terms of characters was the dynamic between Zeke and Soldier. As I was writing this book, I was losing my own cat. I'm not married. I live alone, and for 15 years and 3 months, my everyday pal, 24 hours a day, was my cat Buddy. And when I lost him in the middle of writing this book, it had to come out, or I was going to just lose my mind. And it came out in that relationship and things that happened that he talked about that were my own feelings. Soldier, by the way, is actually my cat's father's name. It was Soldier was Buddy's dad. I don't want to make it Buddy because he had attorneys. I would have gotten sued by my cat. So that was, I think, the hardest part was just emotionally trying to get that onto the page. But they're all a lot of fun to write. I had no trouble writing them at all. They were good people to spend time with.
I love that. We've got a note and a question from Maria, who wants to thank you for creating Babylon 5, which was a very important part of, she says, why she didn't end up killing herself as a teenager. But she also wants to ask, did any of the characters in Together We Will Go surprise you as you were writing the book?
They all surprised me at various points. I wasn't sure how Lisa was going to work out. I was annoyed by her when she first showed up. Everyone apparently is. That's kind of the reaction to Lisa, who's this bipolar character who was always got her life jammed on 11. And just how much that turned around by the end was really pretty cool. Tyler's decision to do what he has to do to help our crew get out of a situation was surprising in its depth. Interesting enough, as she was saying, was it Maria? Was that the name?
Maria.
Maria. I've heard a number of times from people that the work and the words that have come out of what I've done have helped people to not kill themselves. There was a issue of Superman that I did about a woman who's going to jump, and makes him promise that if she does it, he won't try and stop her or catch her. And he promises. And that conversation has been put up a lot online from people who say they read that and they were able to sort of hold on for another day. Life is precious. Life is beautiful and unique and extraordinary and full of potential and the possibility for wonder. And if something that I do can lead someone to stick around just for another few hours for the possibility of joy, for the possibility of love, without guarantees, but that it might happen, then all my work has been worthwhile.
You, out of curiosity, when you say you hear that statement quite frequently, does it ever feel or become burdensome as a creator and as a writer to know that you have that much influence over people?
Well, that's what you want. That's what I think what every artist wants. There's an email I talk about every so often that just flattened me. A guy who said that his very young daughter was born troubled. So all he said about it was trouble. And she was never capable of sitting still for any period of time. There was physical issues. But for some reason, whenever he had Babylon 5 on, he could put her in his lap and she'd be still and she'd watch the show. And he said, I'm writing you this to let you know that, our daughter passed away a few months ago. And what I do now is, when my wife's upstairs asleep, I'll come downstairs, I'll put on an episode of Babylon 5, and I'll put a pillow in my lap and remember the moments I could just be a dad because of your show. You cannot hear that and be unmoved and to know you've done some good in the world. So I think every artist, you want to touch people, you want to influence people. Otherwise, what's the point?
I love that. I'm also like a bit of a crybaby, so I'm trying to hold back tears just hearing that story because I am also flattened by it. I did have a question because this is your first literary novel, which is, have you read or have dared to venture into the Goodreads reviews for the book yet?
I have, like every writer, I'm constantly searching for reactions to the book. And the Goodreads reactions so far have really been quite positive. It's been quite astonishing to see. There's been only a handful who either didn't finish it or didn't like the subject matter. But everyone else, it's I think like 4.5 stars overall right now. Most of the reviews have been 5s. So it's been really gratifying to see that. I like to hear the average person.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because Goodreads, the reviews can veer a little vicious sometimes, but I was quite good. I checked it before the event and was surprised by the sort of almost overwhelmingly positive response. Something I noticed that a lot of the people mentioned in the reviews is the phrase, this book is not for everyone. So I'm curious about, when you were writing the novel, did you even envision a particular reader, picking up this book? I know some novelists, they imagine that they're writing to a specific person. Did you do anything like that, or did you have a demographic or person, ideal reader in mind?
I tend not to. I just kind of go where the story takes me. Also, I don't hang out with people a whole lot, so I don't necessarily have any friends. So I'm thinking of writing about. And I think when someone says this book isn't for everyone, I think something for everyone is nothing for anyone. I think you have to be willing to take a chance. The other word that I've heard the most often in those reviews was unexpected. That they heard that the book was going to be about suicide. They expected it to be dark and grim and moody, and instead there's points in the book where it's charming, it's funny, it's quirky. There's some laugh out loud moments in there. Because humans are not just one thing. We are this amazing cocktail of competing emotions. It's what William Faulkner called the human heart in conflict with itself. And I love delving into the contradictions and the glories of that. So I think if you write for the audience, and I understand why some people do, but I get it. But I think that for me, that way lies madness, because there is no consistent audience. There will always be different degrees of that. So I just go where the story takes me. I go where I'm kicked.
All right, so I think we've got time for just a couple more questions before we say goodbye. I know a lot of people are very interested in hearing about the future of Babylon 5. So I'm gonna go ahead and ask, are we expecting anything else with Babylon 5? And I also want to add to that, are you working on another literary novel? Do you think you have another one in you? And should we be also expecting that in the future?
There are two things in the works that are new regarding Babylon 5. I cannot talk about them right now because I'm not contractually allowed to talk about them. But yes, there are. I finished up another literary novel, which is going to be going to market in September. It is as controversial, I think, but in a very different way as this one is. But it's all one narrative point of view. I like it a lot, actually. It touches on the current protest movement and what that all means, and I like it a lot. I like it a whole lot.
It's actually such a rare thing. I've at the bookstore, I meet a lot of authors, and consistently, especially their sophomore novel is just, it's quite the tribulation. So I'm very happy to hear that you're happy with it.
Thank you. And it goes back to the question earlier about structure. There's 1/3 of the way into the book, I have this person there in the hospital having a conversation with somebody else, and this character references, "Have you met so and so yet?" That line just fell into this. I didn't know what it meant. And after I wrote the exchange, why should I figure out who the hell that is? And that person who was named in that bit of dialogue that I hadn't planned on became the second most important person in the entire story. So these things just have their own lives.
I love that. And I'm sure we all can't wait to see what you have in store for us next. But I think that's our evening, y'all. And an enormous thank you to our speakers tonight, J. Michael Straczynski and Alex Dueben. Thank you both so much for sharing your time and your stories with us tonight. Before we log off, I am once again telling all of you that you can buy a copy of Together We Will Go online at the link provided in the chat box to support Chevalier's books and more nights like these. So one last time, thank you, Alex. Thank you, Joe. Do either of you have any last words for us before we say goodbye?
Alex?
Well, if I can just mention, I mean, we've been talking about suicide, and this is a very serious topic, even though we've been laughing along the way. But the National Suicide Prevention Hotline exists. They're there to listen. You do not have to be desperate or at the end of your rope to call them. Please call them. It's 1-800-273-8255.
I cannot possibly top that. That was a great way to get out.
Right.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you both again. Thank you everyone for joining us wherever you are. Have a great rest of your Thursday night. Take care.
Thank you.